So let's give a little background in terms of halacha. First of all, what is the issue about halal on Yom Ha'atzmaut? So putting aside ideology about the state, obviously whenever you say halal, if you're going to say a bracha, there's always going to be a shaila of a bracha levatala or the like. So here, let me just remind you of a few basic sources. The Gemara in Maseches Megillah asks the question, why don't we say halal on Purim? After all, Purim, our lives were in danger, and Hashem saved us. Why is there no halal on Purim? So the Gemara gives actually 3 terutzim why there is no halal on Purim. Answer number 1 is, and this is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins, that reading Megillah itself is the halal of Purim. You're makayim halal by reading Megillah. Right? So you do say halal, but you say halal via Megillah. That's answer 1. Answer 2 is, we don't say halal on miracles that occurred chutz la'aretz. And since the miracle of Purim occurred chutz la'aretz, we don't say halal. The Gemara asks in Megillah, what about the halal of Pesach? Yitzias Mitzrayim was chutz la'aretz. The answer is that was on the way to bring us to Eretz Yisrael. So therefore that's considered to be an Eretz Yisrael miracle. Now answer number 3, this is the third teretz of the Gemara, is that you only say halal when a geula is complete and the enemy that you're being redeemed from is no longer a threat, like Hanukkah. The problem is that with Achashverosh, even if we got rid of Haman, we were still under the rule of Achashverosh. And the next day, there could have been another Haman. So when you're not out of hot water, you don't say halal. Now those are 3 terutzim the Gemara gives why we don't say halal on Purim. Now what's interesting is that at least one of these answers applies to Yom Ha'atzmaut as well. The first answer, Megillah, has nothing to do with today, and the second answer also has nothing to do with today, but the third answer is very relevant, and that is, if halal is a takana only when the tzara has disappeared, so think about this. On the 5th of Iyar, which was corresponding to the secular date in 1948, when the state of Israel was legally established, that was not the end of a military struggle, fakert. The 5th of Iyar was the day that 5 Arab countries declared war on Israel, and that was the beginning of the War of Independence. So based on the yesod of the Gemara's third answer, that you never say halal when the geula, as it were, is still putting you in a tzara, so l'chara Yom Ha'atzmaut would not be an appropriate day anyway. So that's a non-ideological reason. But let's talk a little bit about the ideology. I've mentioned before, and you probably have learned, that there's a big machlokes, the Rambam and the Ramban. Is there a mitzvah d'oraisa of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Is there a mitzvah min HaTorah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Now, let's start with the Ramban first, because the Ramban is more beferish. The Ramban says, min HaTorah, there's an actual mitzvah to live in the land of Israel. You may have a heter not to. The Ramban is also moder. There may be heterim not to. But we start off with the idea that there's a mitzvah, there's a chiyuv to live here. Where does the Torah say that? So the Ramban points out that this is in Parshas Masai, in the end of Sefer Bamidbar. V'rishtem osa v'shaftem ba, you shall inherit the land. Now, everybody knows that. I'm sure you've heard over the years. The Ramban's opinion is Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah d'oraisa. But what's a little less known is that the Ramban subdivides Yishuv Eretz Yisrael into 4 components. It's not just living here. There are 4 chalokim in what is called Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Chalak number 1, this is quite amazing. There's a mitzvah on the Jewish people to establish sovereignty over all land that is within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael as described in the Torah. Okay, do you hear this again? There is a mitzvah, according to the Ramban, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael doesn't only mean living here. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah to establish sovereignty. Establish sovereignty means establish a state. I'll get to the Goren Ksubas in a moment. That's component number one. Component number two, the Ramban says that we are not to leave the land desolate and uninhabited, meaning even if you have sovereignty, you might just leave it, do nothing to it, but rather you have to develop it so that people can either live there, or agriculturally developed, or industrially developed, or even aesthetically developed, whether it be parkland. You don't leave it in a state of shemama, desolation and abandonment, but you cultivate it so it serves the benefit of the Jews that live here. That's component number two. Component number three is a psychological idea. This is the Ramban at the end of Sefer HaMitzvahs, that no matter where a Jew lives, the Jewish people are not allowed to have a homeland other than Eretz Yisrael. That's kind of a psychological, meaning even if you're living in Golos, you have to look at that as temporary. And the notion of a homeland has to be Eretz Yisrael. This is so fascinating because, as many of you might know, Theodor Herzl, at some point, the founder of modern political or secular Zionism. And again, I don't want to knock Herzl. Again, I want to make, it's an important point to recognize. Herzl was a person, he was absolutely not one who rebelled against the Torah. He didn't know anything. He had no Jewish education whatsoever. I don't think he was even circumcised. He knew nothing at all. So if you talk about a proverbial Tinok Shenishba, he was as close to a Tinok Shenishba as one can imagine. So I'm not going to knock him as a Rasha because he didn't keep Shabbos or didn't believe in the mitzvahs. I think the one thing we can say positively is that despite the fact that he had no connection to Jewish teaching, he was a person who cared about the Jewish people, and this was his idea, to try to do something good for the Jewish people in the aftermath of the anti-Semitism that was poisoning Europe, especially as a result of the Dreyfus trial. That kind of influenced him a lot. Remember, Dreyfus was a French soldier who was framed fraudulently for different types of spying, and many people in the world saw this whole trial as a fake trial that highlighted the poisonous anti-Semitism that existed in Europe. And Herzl developed an idea, which we reject, but Herzl rejected an idea that the reason why people hate Jews is because they're so different than everybody else. They don't have a state, they don't have a government. If we have our own state, we have our own government, then we will be respected by the nations of the world. And then anti-Semitism will go away. So Herzl saw Jewish statehood as equaling normalization. Normalization would mean that anti-Semitism would go away. Now, Lamaisa, I think all of us know that even from a secular perspective, Herzl's idea, it was simply didn't work. If you ask yourself this question, this is a very emotionally difficult question to ask. Has the establishment of the State of Israel reduced anti-Semitism in the world or increased it? It probably increased it. And again, this is what the Navi Yechezkel said thousands of years ago, that when a Jewish person says, I want to be like all of the Goyim, and then I will be accepted, the nations will come back and remind you that no matter how much you want to be like them, they won't let you do it. In fact, in many ways, anti-Semitism is one of the tools Hashem uses to make Jewish people know that we have to be different. It's a very tragic way of having to discover that. But be it as it may, I don't want to impugn Herzl's motivations. Now, because Herzl didn't have a special attachment to Eretz Yisrael or to Torah, so Herzl was willing to accept any type of land as a place for a Jewish state. He just wanted Jews to have a country. So as a result, Herzl at some point, because it was very difficult to get, because at that time, Palestine was under the control of the Ottoman Empire out of Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire didn't want a lot of Jews. I mean, there were Jews here already, but he didn't want a large-scale number of Jews coming in. So Herzl at some point was toying with Uganda to be the Jewish home. And what's interesting is the Ramban had Ruach HaKodesh. The Ramban says, no, Jews are not allowed to make any other state their home other than Eretz Yisrael. So I mentioned three components of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. One is Jewish sovereignty over the land. Number two, that the land should be not desolate, it should be beautified and cultivated. Number three, Eretz Yisrael has to be the homeland, the Jewish national home. Number four is the final one, that I myself should live here unless I have a hedger. So the point is, that's most important is, some people will tell you, well, yeah, there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, but who says you should have a Jewish state? Maybe we shouldn't have a Jewish state until Mashiach comes. Well, it's very clear that the Ramban rejects that idea, because the Ramban says that the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is not only a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel, but there's a mitzvah to establish a Jewish state. Now, we have to be honest. The Ramban is not addressing what is the status of a non-religious state or a state that has Arabs and Jews, in governments. That's very true. But l'chol hapachos, according to the Ramban, the establishment of a Jewish state is considered to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's an important point that a lot of people don't pick up on, because everybody thinks the Ramban just says Yishuv Eretz Yisrael means there's a mitzvah to live here. And if I live here under Arab rule or Palestinian rule, as some people in a fantasy world believe is possible, I mean, frankly, it is delusional. The compassion we have to have for Neturei Karta is that they're just crazy. Because the idea that somehow, if somebody's not responsible for being a lunatic, but somehow the idea that if we give over the land to the Palestinians, we will have, beautiful peace, and we'll have all our yeshivos and all of our shuls and all of our learning, makes no sense at all. But besides the fact that it makes no sense, it would also not be a fullness of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which the Ramban says is part of it is to have a shalita of Am Yisrael over the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. By the way, the biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael are much larger than the state of Israel. Now it's interesting. On one hand, you have Eilat. Eilat is part of the state of Israel, and it may not be part of Eretz Yisrael. That's why some people say in Eilat, you got to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. So there is part of the state of Israel that's outside of Eretz Yisrael, but there's also large parts of Eretz Yisrael that are not in the boundaries of the state of Israel, right? Parts of Lebanon, even parts of Syria, and the like. Now, let me point out this idea that Jewish statehood is something to celebrate also emerges not only from Ramban, but even from Rambam, who doesn't say there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. But the Rambam discusses why we say Hallel on Hanukkah. Now, if we were to ask any of us, why do we say Hallel on Hanukkah? Most of us would think about the miracle of the candles burning for 8 days, or even the miracle of defeating the Greeks so that we could keep the Torah. That's what we would commonly say, because the Greeks were stopping us from keeping the Torah. But you know what the Rambam says? The Rambam says a remarkably Zionist statement. The Rambam says the simcha of Hanukkah was that Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael was restored. Wow. So the Rambam is saying the restoration of Jewish sovereignty. In fact, if you want a makor for saying Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, that would actually be a makor, except for the Gemara in Megillah that says we were still in Sakana. Right? Hanukkah was the end of a war. Yom Ha'atzmaut is the beginning of a war.
We do say Hallel on Hanukkah.
We do, a full Hallel. Now keep in mind that the Hasmonean kings were not tzaddikim. Many of them were non-religious, and many of them were persecutors of the Chachamim. And even so, the Rambam says, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty was a reason for celebration. So, you'll notice one thing. I did not mention anything yet. I'll mention it in a few minutes. About this being the footsteps of Mashiach, this being the beginning of Geula. You don't have to go there yet. As you know, in the prayer that was composed for Medinat Yisrael, that perhaps in some of your home shuls were said, there is a phrase that's a very controversial phrase, that the establishment of the State of Israel is described as Reishis Semichas Gulaseinu, the beginning of the flowering of redemption, the beginning of redemption, the beginning of the messianic process. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but everything I've said until now has nothing to do with that. It's not a question of part of Mashiach, it's not a question of Geula. It's simply an idea that the establishment of Jewish rule over Eretz Yisrael is, according to the Ramban, a fulfillment of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And according to the Rambam, although he does not have Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as a mitzvah, it is a source of rejoicing, because that is the basis of Hanukkah. Okay, this is not yet a messianic perspective. This is simply looking at the idea that Baruch Hashem, the Jewish people have established a sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael. Now, obviously, there's many, many issues that we have with the Medinas Yisrael, legitimately so. The government as a whole is non-religious. Israel is officially a secular state. Like, what do they call it? They call it a Jewish democratic state. A Jewish democratic state. Israel is a schizophrenic state, because how can you be totally democratic if you're Jewish at the same time? In fact, a professor once said, somebody asked him, what is it? Is it a Jewish state? Is it a democratic state? And he said the most important part of the description is the dash in between the two words. It's a schizophrenic state. And therefore we have a lot of disagreements. We have disagreements regarding the army, military service. We have disagreements regarding the standards of modesty, regarding the Chilul Shabbos. And these are things that we argue about, and we try to change, and we try to negotiate. But sometimes what happens is that in the heat of arguments, you get so blinded by individual trees that you don't see an overall forest. And one has to understand, and this is really, I think, a basic orientation to the state of Israel, that we have to be very, very grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what happened in 1948. Remember, 1948 was only 3 years after the end of World War II. The Holocaust kind of lasted for 12 years, from 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, to 1945. In fact, this month, April, or just last month, April 1945, Hitler, committed suicide, and the war ended shortly thereafter. 6 million Jews died, 1.5 million children. Gedolim, Kedoshim, yeshivas were wiped out. The world was desolate. The world was dark. We have not recovered, really, to this day. To this day, we have not really, really recovered. And only 3 years later, there was a momentary window where the world had mercy on the Jewish people. Quickly ended, but right after the Holocaust, there was a particular tiny little window. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed the Jewish people to come back after thousands of years, almost 2,000 years. And if you look at what has been built here in the 72 years or so since then, An infrastructure, the Gashmias is amazing. More importantly, if you look at the Ruchnias, look at the yeshivas, look at the Torah learning, look at the Shmiras HaMitzvahs, look at how much the so-called secular government helps yeshivas. You'd be a little shocked. Now granted, some people like Brisk, and after you have to respect Brisk for their consistency, they will not take a dime or a shekel from the government, because they say when you take government money, you're subject to government control. And you have to respect that view. They take a shita that they will not take government money, but most of us are a little more lenient than that. So the government is a great, great supporter of Torah. Yeah, there's a lot of strings attached, and there's machloksim and fights, etc. But you can't allow the individual issues that we grapple with to obscure the growth of Torah, the growth of Ruchnias, the ability of Jews to come, the ability of Jews to keep mitzvahs, to live with the protection, all coming from Hashem, but with an army and with a police force that are the human shluchim that protect us from enemies that would try to destroy us. Right across the street, there are people that would be happy to slit your neck if they'd have the opportunity. So, not to be a makir tov, not to be a person with gratitude, is a very, very repulsive and disgusting midah. The very name for a Jew is Yehudi, and I mentioned before, many times I've already mentioned, Yehudi means to be grateful. Leah called her fourth son Yehuda because she said, I am grateful to Hashem because He has given me more than I'm entitled. Because she knew there are 4 wives and 12 tribes, so she figured every wife gets 3 kids. When she got number 4, she got more than she deserved. That's gratitude. Says the Sfas Emes, a Jew is called a Yehudi because we have to go through life feeling Hashem has given us more chesed than we deserve. So, a Jew is many things, but the very definition of a Yehudi is one who is grateful. So, how can you look at Eretz Yisrael and not be grateful for the gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us? And how can you look at Eretz Yisrael and not be grateful even for what the Israeli government has given? For police, for fire, for infrastructure, for people who collect the garbage, for chayolim. Yeah, by and large, the Torah world is not in favor of compulsory drafting of yeshiva boys, taking them out of the Beis HaMedrash, because without Torah, there's no nitzachon. So we fight about that, we argue about that. But does that mean you shouldn't be grateful to what soldiers are doing? Right? How do you explain a soldier who even is from, who comes to daven mincha, that somebody spits on him? Can that be explained? Can that be justified? No, it cannot be. So, I think, whether you celebrate today or not today makes no difference. A day is a day. There's nothing magical in this day. This day is not a Yom Tov from Chazal. Makes no difference. The particular day is actually not important. But I think it is a time, at least, when you can reflect on a certain attitude that you have towards Eretz Yisrael, number one, which is independent of statehood, towards Medinas Yisrael, towards the people who create an infrastructure that allows the Torah community to flourish and to grow and to be matzliach. So it provides both the ability to grow spiritually and to be physically protected and the like. And then to have a feeling of hakaras hatov. This is really what the Breitowitz was about. This is why the Breitowitz flew the flag on Yom Ha'atzmaut. He says we have to be grateful. And when we stop being grateful, we're losing part of what it means to be a Jew. To be a Yid, Yehudi, is to say Natalti Yeser El Chelki. Okay, so that's, whether you say Hallel, don't say Hallel, with a bracha, without a bracha, or you shouldn't say it with a bracha, either way, whether you say Tachanan, don't say Tachanan, these are technicalities. These are minor things. But whether I should be Makir Tov to what soldiers are doing, to what police are doing, to what firemen are doing, to what garbage people are doing, that's not disputable. There has to be Akaras HaTov. When there's not Akaras HaTov, there is something sick in our personalities. Our personalities are not expressing what Judaism is about. Now, there's a big consolation prize. There's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. And again, forgive me for repeating, I've said this many times too, but I've often quoted the pasuk in Mishlei, Kamayim apanim el panim, kein lev ha'adam li'adam, as water reflects the face that you show it, the heart of a person reflects what you show it. The Vilna Gaon explains, when I look into a pool of water, whatever my face is what I see back. I smile at the water, I see a smiling face. I frown at the water, there's a frowning face. Right? Whatever I show the water is what the water shows me. So says Shlomo HaMelech, the heart of a human being will reflect back that which you show that human being. I show you respect, chashivas, love, regard. You will feel that way towards me. I show you disdain. You don't matter. You don't count. You will feel that way towards me. That's what Shlomo HaMelech is saying. As water reflects what you show it, the heart of another person reflects what you show it. So here's the thing. Let's talk about, our enemy, the Chiloni, the big bad, secular Jew who wants to uproot Torah. If I look at that Jew and I look at him as bad, no good, worthless, Amalek, chas v'shalom, then how is he going to look at me? Well, what did Shlomo HaMelech say? What I show him is what he'll give back to me. If, on the other hand, I could see his goodness, I could be grateful for what he's doing, I could understand the importance of his role in this society, then the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is he will then understand what it is that we do. So that's why religious, secular issues never get resolved in the state of Israel, because each side demonizes, insults, and degrades the other side. In other words, a religious person looks at the Chilonim with the vocabulary of Apikoris, Goy, Shegetz, Amalek, and the Chiloni looks at the religious person as parasites, ingrate. But what would be if we would stop that vicious cycle? And what would be if I would look at the soldier as somebody who is Moser Nefesh for Klal Yisrael? Somebody who is doing his best. Someone that I appreciate their sacrifices. How would they then look at a person who learns Torah? Again, these are spiritual dimensions. Shlomo HaMelech was the Chacham Mikol Adam. And Shlomo HaMelech says if we change our perceptions of other people will invariably change their perceptions of us. Right? A few years ago, when there first was a proposal to draft yeshiva bachur, so there was a mass rally near the bus station that was estimated to be 800,000 people. I'm not, sometimes crowd numbers are exaggerated, but 800,000 people. And I remember people were so proud of that because there was no violence, there was no screaming, there was no name calling. It was a peaceful demonstration, right? No garbage cans turned over with fire. A peaceful demonstration of tefillah, asking Hashem to b'matal the gzeira. A wonderful thing, really, a wonderful thing. But I thought to myself, and they talked about how you can't take B'nai Torah into the army, etc. What would be if at the end of that demonstration, which was Baruch Hashem, a very good demonstration, there would also be a tefillah that would be said that for those who are in the army, Hashem should protect them. In other words, what if after stating our shita, we would then be mispalel for the other side? Imagine if 800,000 people would have done that. I'm not a Navi and I can't tell you anything, but I think Mashiach would have come. I think Mashiach would have come mamish. 800,000 people. 600,000 people itself is a critical mass number. Those are the numbers of the men who left Mitzrayim, right? So say the Shekhinah is Shoira on 600,000 people. There's even a special bracha that you recite on the rare occasion when you see 600,000 people. So this was 800,000. This was 1/3 more than that. And if side by side with stating our hisnagdos, we would also understand the other side, I think that would have brought, that mamish would have brought the geula.